All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our PSLF webinar. Before we get started, I do just want to quickly note we are not going to use the raise hand function. We are using the Q&A function for questions, so you can put your questions in the Q&A area. I forgot to disable the raise hand function before we started. So if you could just not use that function, that would be great. And then we'll just keep going. So, all right. Happy Tuesday to everybody. As you might know, if you've attended one of our webinars before, my name is Amber Hay. I am the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Advocate, or PSLF advocate, here at the Office of the Student Loan Advocate. Terry, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Terry Parker. I work in the State Human Resources Office, which is part of OFM, and I am the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Policy and Performance Analyst. Glad to be here with everyone today.
Great, thank you, Terry. So today we're going to speak with you about public service loan forgiveness. Some of you might already know quite a bit about PSLF if you've attended a webinar with us previously. Others, maybe this is your first time. We're going to give kind of a wide overview and then go into some specifics that folks might have some questions on right now. Please know, wherever you are at in your student loan journey, you are not alone. Thousands of Washingtonians and millions of Americans are being impacted by student loan debt. Our hope is that by the end of this presentation, you'll feel a little bit better about your knowledge of PSLF and that process, have an idea of kind of next steps, feel more comfortable navigating your resources, and just feeling like you're not alone, that you're in this with someone else. Before we dive into our material, we have a few presentation reminders to share. So this presentation is being recorded. We will post it onto the Student Loan Advocate webpage, as well as our PSLF specific webpage. We will also email out the recording and our slides for reference following the presentation, so you can have access to the links that we're using. It may take a week or so to get those materials posted and emailed out. Please note the chat is disabled for participants, and participants are muted. We have, I think, over 200, almost 300 folks with us today. Please enter your questions using the question and answer or Q&A function. You can upvote questions that you would like to have answered live using the little thumbs up icon underneath each question. We will have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. We never have enough time for all of them. So if you see someone else has asked a question that relates to what your question is, upvote that rather than sharing your question if you can. Please note we also have live closed captions enabled on Zoom, so you can use that live closed captioning. Okay. We wanted to share some general disclaimers before we move into the rest of the presentation. So first, every effort has been made to ensure that this presentation is as accurate as possible, but know that the information that we share is subject to change and could be out of date as things change, right? So we encourage folks to continue to check the Department of Education's Federal Student Aid website, which is that studentaid.gov, for the most current and up-to-date information on PSLF and related student loan topics. We know that there is a lot of uncertainty right now with so many changes happening at the federal level, and that is causing a lot of anxiety. We know it from folks that we've heard from. We ourselves are feeling it, right? We're all feeling that same stress. And I want to acknowledge that we're all in that same boat, and unfortunately, we don't have all of the answers. We wish that we did. Um, there are outstanding questions that we are still waiting to learn more about, and we don't know how long we'll need to wait to get those answers. We're living in unprecedented times. Please just know that we continue to do what we can to advocate for Washington borrowers. So Terry and myself, thank you in advance for your understanding and your patience throughout today's presentation. And we just want to remind you that the Office of the Student Loan Advocate, my office, cannot tell you what you should do. We can only provide information and education to help you make informed decisions regarding your own situation. All right, so that said, here's our brief agenda for what we're going to cover today. We're going to give you an overview of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. We're going to cover how to qualify and apply for the program, as well as how to track your progress in your studentaid.gov account. We'll dive a little bit into the SAVE litigation and how it impacts folks pursuing PSLF. And we also plan to review the PSLF buyback process. And at the end, we'll provide some additional resources and information for how to get individual support. All right, so what exactly is PSLF? So PSLF was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Bush back in 2007. So it was a bipartisan bill with broad support. It's a federal program that forgives the remaining balance on direct loans after a borrower has made 120 qualifying monthly payments, which is 10 years or more potentially, under a qualifying repayment plan while working full-time for an eligible public service employer. And I'm going to pass it over to Terry to talk a little bit more about the steps in the program. And again, once again, we're going to cover the basics of the program, how to apply, and then we're going to dive into some of those questions that you have about some of the current events and topics that are occurring. Okay.
All right,
Terry.
so here we go. Let's go to the next slide. Here again are the steps that Amber just briefly outlined. What do you need to do to qualify for PSLF? And I noticed one of the first questions in the chat is, if I've worked for an employer for a time, but still haven't applied for PSLF, and you do it now, how do you get back credits? So I'll just say, first of all, you need the right type of employment and the right type of loan, the right type of repayment plan, and that employment and repayment need to happen concurrently, and then the right number of payments. So let's talk first, what employment qualifies for PSLF. You have to be directly employed with a public service employer. And the easiest way to figure that out is by looking at your W-2 form. So in essence, I'm kind of skipping around on the slide. Let's just talk about that first. So who are public employers? Any level of government. So this is state, city, county, it can be a municipality, federal, tribal governments, all qualify. Any organization that is registered as a 501c3 nonprofit is qualifying. And then there are also other nonprofits who provide qualifying services as listed in CFR or even our state statute. But again, this is a federal program. So the definitions are, we go with what's the federal government has identified. And you do have to be employed when you apply. For PSLF, 30 hours or more a week is what qualifies as full-time employment. So this can be with one qualifying employer, or it can be multiple jobs that qualify. And we want to call out that people who work as a contractor for one of these entities, generally do not qualify because they're not directly employed by a public service employer. In Washington, we have one known exception. And so this would be if you are contracted as a public defender with the Office of Public Defense, there's a state law that says that employment can be counted for PSLF, and we'll cover that a little bit more. All right, I think I'm ready to go on to the next slide. Maybe not. Okay, sorry, I have to go backwards, and I need to cover something that I thought I was going to find sooner. So I want to just talk a little bit more about which employment qualifies. So for contract employment, you can check with your employer, and if you work for the state, you can contact me and I can help you ferret that out with your employer. We also want to note if you are an adjunct part-time faculty at a college, you can receive credit based on the number of credit hours you're teaching. And the formula for that is 3.35 hours of work gets credited for every credit hour teaching. And this may be a place where working for in multiple positions could be useful. You do have to meet this full-time criteria working for the right employer, and you need to be making your qualifying payments at the same time. And the last thing I'll say is if you're getting ready to leave employment, make sure that you've already applied to your employer for credit. So again, I'm going to go back to the question that was in the chat. You can apply for prior service credit. You just submit your employment certification request to the employer, and that would then be married up with the qualifying loan payments that you've been making. All right, I'm ready to move on, Amber, to the next slide. So which loans qualify for PSLF? First thing to know is they need to be a direct loan from the U.S. Department of Education. So we have subsidized direct loans, unsubsidized direct loans, and direct plus loans, which include grad plus and parent plus. You can also have a consolidated direct loan. And on this slide, we have outlined the qualifying loans with a dark green border. So this leaves Perkins loans and federal family education loans, or FEAL, or I pronounce it FEAL, I don't know, maybe some people say FEL loans. Those would not qualify for PSLF credit. Next slide. You can consolidate those loans that don't qualify in order to attain PSLF credit. So Perkins loans, the federal family education loans can be consolidated. And when you do that, you can access an income-driven repayment plan. So please note that a Parent Plus loan needs to be consolidated in order to qualify. And when you consolidate loans, be aware that there is a weighted average rule that applies. This began in September of 2024. And essentially, if you consolidate a loan that already has qualifying payments towards PSLF with another loan, the new direct consolidation loan will receive credit for a weighted average of those qualifying payments. So this means it's critical to certify all of your employment for PSLF before you consolidate to ensure that there's an accurate weighting. And again, you can apply for past employment to be certified as long as you were making qualifying payments during that past employment. Next slide.
Terry, do you mind if I add just a quick note as well?
No, please do. Thank you.
Uh,
Amber's here to keep me in the right path.
With consolidation, so it's not required to consolidate to access PSLF unless you have one of those loan types that are not eligible for PSLF as they are. Technically, with Parent Plus loans, you can access PSLF with Parent Plus loans as they are, but you only have access to the 10-year standard repayment plan, which would pay off your loan in those 10 years. And so if you want access to one of the income driven repayment plans, specifically income contingent repayment for Parent Plus loans, that requires the consolidation. So consolidation is not necessary for everybody. If you have loans that were taken out, all for undergrad, let's say, and you start repayment all at the same time with those loans, and then you've had the same employment, there's not necessarily a need to consolidate because all of those loans might then be on the same timeline. So consolidation can get tricky and can be really personal. So there's kind of a lot of factors to consider. So I just want to kind of give that context. We don't want to misrepresent that everybody has to consolidate. That is not the case at all. It is highly kind of situation dependent. Okay. All right, Terry, take it away.
Thank you, Amber. Could you move forward to the next slide? All right, so we want to ask, have you logged into your studentaid.gov account recently? This is where you will find information about your federal student loans, including your type of loan, your loan balance, and your student loan servicer. So this is a screen print when you go to studentaid.gov, and you'll see where we've highlighted, there are 2 links up in the upper right-hand corner. When you log in, it will ask for your federal student aid ID or FSA ID. This is your username and password. If you don't have an account yet, then click on the Create an Account button. So you can find the information you need by exploring the elements on your dashboard. And we encourage you to investigate and learn all you can about your loans. If you need to consolidate your loans, you can complete the consolidation application on your studentaid.gov account. I'm going to pass it back to Amber to talk more about qualifying repayment plans.
All right. So thanks, Terry, for covering the right type of employment and the right type of loans. So now let's talk a little bit about repayment plans. For credit towards PSLF, any of the income-driven repayment plans, also known as IDR plans, count towards PSLF or can be used towards PSLF. IDR, income-driven repayment, is an umbrella term that covers 4 different repayment plans. Those 4 different plans, which are listed out here on this slide, are the Saving on a Valuable Education or SAVE plan, the income-based repayment, pay-as-you-earn, payee, and income contingent repayment, ICR. As I've seen questions already come up in the Q&A about the SAVE litigation. So yes, the SAVE plan is currently tied up in litigation and is paused essentially. We're going to cover that more after we cover the basics for PSLF. So stay tuned. The other repayment plans are currently available. Each of these plans has different eligibility requirements. So not all of them may be available to you. It really is dependent upon your household size and your income. So we recommend borrowers take a look at the different options closely to see what might be the best fit. In addition to the income-driven repayment plans, the 10-year standard repayment plan is also eligible for PSLF. This plan is the one that new graduates are put onto if they don't select another plan. If you're on this plan, right, you would repay your loan in 10 years and pay it off. And so you don't typically want to stay on this plan because you would just pay your loan before you would reach forgiveness or at the same time that you would reach forgiveness. Some periods of time on the standard repayment plan are okay, as long as you also have periods under an IDR plan or potentially under eligible forbearances and deferments that might count towards PSLF. Repayment plans that are not eligible for PSLF include the 30-year standard repayment plan available for consolidated loans, as well as any graduated and extended repayment plans. So those do not count towards PSLF moving forward. If you have Parent Plus loans, they initially, as I said earlier, only have access to the 10-year standard repayment plan to qualify for PSLF. Parent Plus loans must be consolidated to access the income contingent repayment plan. ICR is the only plan that folks that have Parent Plus loans in their consolidated loans can utilize. All right, you can apply for any of the IDR plans using the IDR application on studentaid.gov when you're logged in. You can also submit a manual IDR application directly on your servicer's website. Please note that we have heard that the online IDR application as well as the online consolidation applications are not currently available. If you go to try to access them, you can't click on the button to start them. So manual or paper forms can still be submitted to the student loan servicers, and those paper forms have instructions on them as to how to do that. So please be aware of that right now. We don't know when it's going to be turned back on for the online applications. We just know that right now it's not accessible, or as of last night when I was checking this presentation. To get an estimate of your monthly payments under the different plans right now, you do need to call your student loan servicer, or you could try to do the calculations yourself based on the information on the student loan or the studentaid.gov website. If you do call your servicer, please note that you might be on hold for several hours, especially if your servicer is MOHELA. We've had borrowers report that they've waited for several hours. They've tried to call back and get a call back and still waited for more hours or not received that call back. So unfortunately, there's not a way for us to fix that. It may just be that you are on hold for quite a while to try to get that information. Our office does not estimate monthly payments for borrowers. So please note that as well. If you contact us, that's not something that we can assist with. When you're trying to decide what IDR plan might be best for your situation, usually the lowest monthly payment available is going to maximize the amount of forgiveness that you can get at the end of your PSLF 10-year period. One of the things we also wanted to highlight, and again, we'll touch on this a little bit later in relation to the SAVE litigation, but there was a period of time where IDR applications, the processing of them was paused. So from about July to mid-December or so, the processing of those applications were paused. They have restarted, but servicers have a backlog of, thousands of those applications to get through. So please be patient if it takes a while to hear anything about an IDR application, if you've submitted one at any time since July 2024. With the IDR application processing, only applications that are marked for folks trying to get into income-based repayment, which is IBR, income contingent repayment, which is ICR, and pay-as-you-earn, payee, only applications with those three repayment plans are being processed. If you have an IDR application that was marked to get into the SAVE plan, or that was marked with the option that says like, put me in the lowest option, those applications are still paused. So be aware of that. Please note that the terms of the SAVE plan and other IDR plans are subject to the outcome of ongoing litigation. And I'll pass it back to Terry to talk a little bit more about payment counts.
All right. To recap so far, you have the right type of employment, the right type of loan, and the right type of repayment plan. The last piece you need is to make 120 qualifying payments. So what payments actually count towards the 120 needed for PSLF? All 120 payments must be made while under a qualifying repayment plan, and for the full amount due is shown on your bill. This includes $0 payments for those who qualify for it under an income-driven repayment plan. The only times these two rules don't apply is if you are under one of the accepted types of deferments or forbearances at any time during that month. Payments also need to be made after October 1st, 2007, because that's when the program started. The payments do not need to be made consecutively or with the same student loan servicer or while you work at the same employer. You can work for 10 different employers in 10 years if they're all qualifying public service employers. One tip to make sure that you are making on time and complete payments is to sign up for automatic debit with your loan servicer. It's important to keep in mind there are times when you cannot make qualifying payments. You can only make qualifying monthly payments during periods you have a payment due. This means that you can't make a qualifying payment while you have in-school status, are in your grace period, and in certain types of deferment or forbearances. Any payments made during those periods would not be considered qualifying for PSLF. In some cases, you can decline in-school deferment for previous loans in some circumstances. If you return to school, for example, to get a master's degree, you can decline the in-school deferment for your undergraduate loans to continue making qualifying payments on those loans. However, you would not be able to decline your in-school deferment for the new loans you receive for your graduate education. On this slide are the types of deferment and forbearances that can count as qualifying payments. If you were employed an average of 30 hours a week at one or more qualifying employers during that period, most of them are self-explanatory, like cancer treatment, economic hardship deferment, or military service. Others are a little less known, like the administrative forbearance due to a local or national emergency, or the administrative forbearance for collecting supporting documentation from the borrower, such as when you apply for an income-driven repayment plan. All of these types of deferments and forbearances count as qualifying payments, even though you are not technically paying anything during these periods. If you are on the SAVE forbearance, this does not qualify for PSLF. Even if you make voluntary payments during the SAVE forbearance, those months won't count towards PSLF. They may be eligible for PSLF buyback, which we will touch on later in the presentation. Back to Amber.
All right. So now that we know what the PSLF program is, let's talk a little bit about how the process is to actually apply to get your loans forgiven. So when you're ready to certify your employment, to get the process started with PSLF, you can use the PSLF help tool on studentaid.gov to generate and digitally sign your PSLF form. That's what we call the form that's used to certify your employment and apply for PSLF. There is a DocuSign feature within the help tool that allows both you as the borrower as well as your employer to digitally sign the form. The tool then automatically submits that digitally signed PSLF form to federal student aid. What we recommend is when you submit the form for signature for your employer, we recommend that you separately email your HR department to notify them that they're going to receive this DocuSign request. We have found that by doing this, employers are more likely to complete the form in a timely manner and don't miss the request coming through, as sometimes it can go to the spam folder. Paper forms are also available, but generally we want to discourage folks from using it where possible because The help tool really helps prevent the most common errors that people make on the form. You would also need to either fax, mail, or upload the paper form, which is more difficult to track. When you use the help tool, it actually has a tracker that you can see, and I have a screenshot in a later slide to show you what that tracker looks like. Best practice is to submit your PSLF form yearly whenever you switch employment, whenever you switch between full-time and part-time employment with the same employer. This will help you to evaluate your eligibility on a yearly basis and ensures that you see progress towards your count of qualifying payments. We don't recommend waiting until you're 10 to submit all your forms because it can be difficult to track down prior employers to certify employment, although you can retroactively go and certify that employment. But also, if there's something wrong, you can find out about it sooner, such as like an incorrect payment plan. So we recommend submitting the form yearly, and again, when you switch employers or change your full-time, part-time status. This slide has the links for the help tool. Key pieces of information that you'll need is your employer's identification number, their federal identification number. Usually you can find that on your W-2. You can also contact your HR department to get that number. You'll need your dates of employment. If you're still working there, your start date is what's most important. If it's a prior employer, also your end date, as well as your employer's PSLF contact email address. If you don't know who it is to reach out to, rather than kind of picking a number from picking an email from the HR website, we recommend reaching out first again, so you have that contact so they know that they can expect to see your form come through. If you've worked for Washington state agencies or public institutions of higher education, you can use the PSLF directory that's linked on this second bullet to find the email address of that agency's PSLF contact, as well as their EIN and email. Just a reminder, we are not using the raise hand function. We forgot to disable it. So please put questions in the Q&A where possible. Once you submit your form through the PSLF help tool, you can track that progress of the form in the My Activity section of your studentaid.gov account. This slide has a sample screenshot of what the tracker looks like. We know it's hard to read, but it's basically, it shows you when you submitted the form, when it was sent for signature, if it's been received, and when it was received. You can download a copy of the form. It's a really useful tool. And again, one of the reasons that we recommend using the help tool rather than manually submitting forms. One of the things that's neat is if you know your employer won't digitally sign the form, if you know that they want to do a physical signature, you can still use the help tool to generate your form and then print it'll fill out the information for you. You can then, if you've used the help tool to generate the form, you can come back to this tracker and upload that manual form so that it's in the tracker. So again, help tool should be your kind of go-to first attempt to get your PSLF forms completed. If you do submit any manual forms, make sure that your file, when you scan back in, includes all pages of the PSLF form, not just the ones that you filled out, but the instruction pages as well. We have seen some folks receive incorrect denials because they didn't have all of the forms or all of the pages. Once your form is processed and eligibility determined, you'll be able to view eligible and qualifying payments on studentaid.gov, access self-service tools such as the PSLF progress tracker, and check your status of your PSLF progress. Please note that you'll continue making payments to your current servicer. So while you can manage quite a bit on your studentaid.gov, payments still go through your servicer and your account with them. If you haven't had a chance to get into your studentaid.gov yet, this is a sample of what the PSLF dashboard within there looks like. So you can log in from your dashboard. You can either view details on your loans specifically. There's a section when you scroll down to view details specific to PSLF, and that brings up what you see in this kind of screenshot with the heading of PSLF payments. You'll see some subheadings with loan details, payment history, and employment certification. What you can see right there with the loans listed out and the individual progress, that's that loan details section, and you can click on that payment summary option to view more specifics. When you look at your payment history, you can actually see a breakdown of all of your previous payments, and whether they're qualifying, if there's ones that need employment certification. So maybe you've made the payment but haven't certified that employment yet. It'll tell you that. It'll also tell you if it was in an ineligible deferment or forbearance. So this gives you a lot of great information, and you can use the filter option if you want to see specific time periods or specific statuses. Under that employment certification tab, you can see details such as the employers that you've submitted, the hours worked per week, and you can verify, okay, has all of my employment actually been certified, and check the dates. This is great to go back and just double check that all of your employment that goes back to as early as October 2007. But really, if you started repayment after that, going back to when you started repayment, but it's just a way to verify, do you have everything there and on file, and is it showing as a qualifying employer? Note that some of this information is still being updated. There was a backlog of PSLF forms after there was a processing pause this summer. So if you have a form that maybe you submitted, but it hasn't popped up yet, that might be part of the backlog. So not surprising. Backlogs are a common theme right now. All right, I'm gonna pass it back to Terry to start talking a little bit about the SAVE lawsuit or SAVE litigation that might be impacting folks.
Right. Now that we've covered the bulk of information related to PSLF, we are going to turn towards talking about the SAVE litigation, which may be impacting many of you. Please note that if you were never on the SAVE plan, this section largely does not apply to you. But we know that around 8 million folks nationwide were on SAVE, which is why we felt this was important to cover today. As we mentioned earlier, SAVE, or the Saving on a Valuable Education Plan, was one of the income-driven repayment plans, IDR plan, and it provided the most generous terms of all the IDR plans. Monthly payments that were made under that plan prior to July 2024 are eligible to count toward PSLF with qualifying employment. 2 lawsuits were filed last year in an attempt to block the SAVE plan before its most generous elements went into effect. As a result, SAVE was temporarily blocked by a court injunction, pausing the SAVE plan on July 18, 2024. If you were enrolled or are enrolled in the SAVE program, you should have been placed into a forbearance. Under the SAVE forbearance, interest should not accrue and payments are not required. Please note that some of the loan servicers show the interest accruing for a month or even a quarter before they remove it. Other services show no accrual. Voluntary payments made during the time will not count towards PSLF. In general, time spent in this forbearance does not count for public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment plan forgiveness. There are also several other SAVE lawsuit impacts. Income-driven repayment application processing was temporarily paused until mid-December 2024. Processing of these applications is occurring, but there's a backlog that services are working through. Borrowers should expect a lengthy delay in processing of applications, and there's currently no estimate of how long it will take. IDR forgiveness which forgives loan balances after 20 or 25 years of repayment, is currently paused for all plans except income-based repayment. This doesn't really affect folks pursuing PSLF unless they leave public service and plan to utilize IDR forgiveness, but it's worth mentioning. Payments made under all the IDR plans still count towards PSLF. Recently, you may have heard about the Eighth Circuit Court ruling. This ruling reaffirmed the broad injunction against the implementation of the SAVE plan. It doesn't change the injunction that was placed in July of 2024. It just reaffirmed the injunction will continue until litigation is resolved. Borrowers on SAVE will be in this general forbearance until the legal situation changes or servicers are able to send bills to borrowers at the appropriate monthly payment amount. Currently, federal student aid expects this will be resolved no earlier than September 2025. Continue to check the SAVE Court action page on FSA's website for updates. While the outcome of the pending litigation is uncertain, we encourage borrowers to think thoroughly through the possible outcomes as they determine what to do next. And to address that, Amber's going to share.
All right, so we know this is a complicated situation, and that there are options, but they're not necessarily the best options, right? There's options available. So we're going to go over those options that you have if you are still enrolled in SAVE. However, we want you to keep a few things in mind. Our office cannot tell you what to do. We can only explain your options. Millions of borrowers across the country are facing this exact same issue, and the same questions that you have, others likely have as well. So know that you're not alone in this. The options that we're going to share, they all have risks and timeframes that you have no control over. Our office also has no control over them. We can't tell you when things will resolve specifically. We can't tell you how. So there's going to be an element of uncertainty, and generally with any of these options. No matter your choice, be patient. It may take time for the lawsuit to be resolved, and processing is just extra slow right now at the servicers. All right. So what options do you have if you are still on the general forbearance under SAVE, commonly called the SAVE forbearance? There are three kind of primary options. You could do nothing. You could submit an IDR application to enroll in one of the other IDR plans, or you could switch to the 10-year standard repayment plan. So if you do nothing, right? So if you just opt to wait and see what happens with the lawsuits and continue on the SAVE forbearance or the SAVE general forbearance, you would continue to not have payments due, and you would not accrue interest during that forbearance. Down the road, you could eventually consider requesting to buy back the months that are spent within the SAVE forbearance. We are going to talk a little bit about buyback in just a few minutes, but you might be able to buy or may be able to buy the buyback, or use the buyback, to buy those months that were spent in the SAVE forbearance. So that's one option. Second option, you could submit an IDR application to enroll in one of the other IDR plans if you're eligible. So remember that eligibility for those plans is determined primarily on household size, family income, as well as your outstanding loan balance. You can submit the IDR application. Paper applications can be submitted directly to servicers through their upload portals. If it takes longer than 10 days to process your IDR application, you should be placed into a 60-day processing forbearance. That 60-day processing forbearance does count towards PSLF. However, that processing forbearance also accrues interest. If after that 60-day processing forbearance, your IDR application still has not been processed, then you would be placed into the general forbearance that's 0% interest that would not count towards PSLF. So that's just kind of for you to be aware of. Besides IDR plans, again, the 10-year standard repayment plan counts towards PSLF. So some folks have opted to switch to the 10-year standard repayment plan. So broadly, those are the options available. Each of them have some pros and cons, right? Or advantages and drawbacks that you need to consider what might be best for your situation. So if you do nothing and kind of wait to see what happens, it's possible that the Department of Ed could later say that maybe the SAVE forbearance does count for PSLF. That's probably unlikely, but we really don't know. Pros, it doesn't require any action from you. It means you have no payments. You're not accruing interest. The cons is you might need to go through the buyback process once you have 120 months of qualifying employment. The PSLF buyback process is new. It's under the recent regulations that went into effect in 2023. But we don't know the future. So I would say it's uncertain. So maybe it depends on how close are you to that 120 months of employment, right? That option 2, if you submit an IDR application to enroll in one of the other plans. Pro is if you get placed into that processing forbearance, you're going to get a couple of months of PSLF eligibility. Cons with this option, not all borrowers are eligible for other IDR plans. You have to call your servicer for an estimate of those monthly payments. Likely it will increase your monthly payment for most folks, but could be potentially by a significant amount depending on the plan. And you might still be placed back into that non-PSLF eligible forbearance that folks are already on with the SAVE if after that 60-day processing forbearance ends and you haven't had your application processed. And we still don't know, we don't even have an average of how long it's taking for those applications to be processed. With the 10-year standard repayment plan, pros, continued PSLF eligibility. You can submit your payments and get progress, right? Cons is that most folks are doing IDR plans because they can't afford the 10-year standard repayment plan. It's unaffordable for most borrowers. So again, these are kind of the options that you have at the moment. We encourage you to read through the SAVE Court Actions page that we've linked and we'll link in this presentation so that you can kind of carefully make an informed decision that's best for you. And I know there's going to be questions. I can't see the chat or the Q&A right now, but we know that there's going to be questions on this. Please be patient with us and also know that we may not have the answer to those questions. Okay. As we are close to wrapping up here and jumping to those questions, I want to highlight for you the PSLF buyback. In our prior presentations, we've only really touched on it a little bit, that it exists. There is now a lot more direction provided by studentaid.gov on their webpage about the PSLF buyback process. So we're going to cover it a little bit. We can't cover all of the elements to it because it could probably just be a presentation all by itself. But I want to give you a little bit more information about it if it's something that you've heard about and are curious about. So PSLF buyback was created as a part of the new regulations that went into effect back in July 1st, 2023. Those regulations came about through what they call the negotiated rulemaking process. Typically, in order for those to be changed, they would have to go through another set of negotiated rulemaking process, which is not a quick process. It takes a while. The buyback was created so that folks could, as you might guess, buy back months that were in an ineligible forbearance or deferment. So those months can, so you can only buy back those months once you've reached 120 months of qualifying employment. So that is the key thing here is, have you, or the time that you're thinking about it, have you reached 100 months of qualifying employment? So you have to kind of calculate this yourself. Some of the tools might be helpful. If you've certified all your employment and you can see that you've got some of those months that if they counted, you'd have your 120 payments. That's a good way of identifying that you maybe have 120 months of qualifying employment. That requirement of that you need to have those 120 months of employment first, that ensures that when you buy back the months in deferment or forbearance, that you would then receive forgiveness at that time. So if you are early in your PSLF journey, this is probably something that you probably are not yet thinking about really. But for folks that are close to 120, this is probably the most relevant for you. You can only buy back months if you still have an outstanding balance on your loan. You have approved qualifying employment for the months that you're trying to buy back. So that's where it's really important to make sure that you've certified your employment. And buying back those months, as I said, will complete your 120 qualifying PSLF payments. Okay. There are certain months that you cannot buy back. There are certain statuses where if you were in school, if you were in a grace period, default, or bankruptcy, or if you were in a monitoring period for total and permanent disability, those months are not eligible to be bought back. Additionally, if you consolidated your loans at any point, you can only buy back months that are after the most recent consolidation loan was dispersed. So you cannot buy back prior months before that consolidation or that last consolidation. This is a brief summary of how to apply. So we recommend, viewing your loan history on your studentaid.gov account, specifically under that PSLF progress tracker, to see periods of forbearance or deferment. You can also look at your individual loan history separate from the PSLF tracker to see like time periods of, okay, I was in repayment from this date to this date. I was in forbearance from here to here. You can see that on your studentaid.gov account. The PSLF progress tracker can be used to verify which of those months might be eligible for PSLF buyback, right? If you've already certified your employment and you see that they say that they were in an ineligible forbearance or deferment, those might be able to be bought back. You want to make sure that all of your public service employment is certified. And then there's a reconsideration portal, essentially, that you would submit this statement that we've got quoted specifically to request buyback. So again, we're only doing a brief kind of intro to it. The PSLF buyback page, which we are going to link on these slides, has a huge amount of detail, has frequently asked questions on it that may address some of your outstanding questions or concerns. If you are eligible to buy back the months after you've submitted the request, the Department of Ed would send you a buyback agreement that would have the amount that you would need to pay, as well as instructions to make the payment within 90 days. How they calculate what that payment amount will be is dependent on kind of what repayment plan you were in before and after that time period you were in that deferment. And there's a little bit more nuance to it as well. But I know that we've got a half hour left for questions, so I don't want to dive too much into it. But essentially, they're going to send you what the amount that they've calculated is. You make that payment within that 90 days, right? You would then receive discharge. So if you're going to go through this process, you do need to continue to make monthly payments until your buyback is approved. So please note that as well. All right. We're going to last couple of slides here, and then we're going to go to questions. So I'll turn it back over to Terry.
Hi, we're getting to the end of our presentation, and we want to highlight a few resources that could be helpful to you as you navigate your student loans and apply for the PSLF program. First, The Student Achievement Council and specifically the Student Loan Advocate have steps to apply for PSLF document. It includes step-by-step instructions on how to apply for PSLF. It's a great document, especially for those who are starting from scratch when it comes to PSLF. But it's also great for those who are already in the program who don't want to miss anything and want to make sure they've checked all the boxes. Also, there's a PSLF frequently asked questions document and other helpful links and resources. And they are all available on our website, wsac.wa.gov/PSLF. So please go check it out. If you have a specific question about your case, or maybe you would like to submit a complaint about your student loan servicer, please use our complaint questions form, and it's available at studentcomplaints.wa.gov. Make sure to select Student Loan Questions and Complaints form. Please note, it's currently taking us about 6 to 8 weeks to respond to questions and complaints that are submitted. And we will share a link to the Student Loan Advocates PSLF webpage. Well, actually, it will be available in the slide deck, which will be provided to everyone who registered and attended the program. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today. We do have a survey form. There's a QR code on the screen here, and there's also we'll provide the link in the notes when we send out the slide presentation. Or, well, Amber, should I go ahead and just drop the link for the survey into the chat? Okay.
Yeah, if you can, go for it.
There you go.
That's the end of the official presentation. We have about a half hour scheduled for questions. We know that there's, I think, over 100 questions possibly in the Q&A. So if you can, go in and upvote questions, that helps us to kind of prioritize. Again, we're not going to get to everything. We're going to try to see if we can hit the most, I don't want to say most important because all the questions are important, honestly, but the ones, I guess, folks that are maybe most concerned about, or the ones that we maybe think are really critical to make sure that we answer live today. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. And Terry, I'll go ahead and take this first one. I know you saw it, you're probably like, So this top upvoted question: if the Department of Education is dissolved, does that mean this program will also be dissolved? So first caveat is we don't have a crystal ball and we cannot, precisely predict what will happen. What we do know, which is important to point out, is PSLF is a law that was passed by Congress. So the law in itself does not necessarily depend on the Department of Education existence, but it facilitates the program. So, well, I can't say anything for certain. The program itself would require a act of Congress to change or remove it, or a Supreme Court decision to overturn it. And as of right now, we're not aware of any litigation that's related specifically to PSLF or that's on PSLF. So that's where we kind of stand right now. That said, we're in unprecedented times. We don't know what can happen. Our kind of thought process right now is, we have the tools that we have. Nothing has changed right now as it relates to the program. So we're continuing to recommend folks do the things that they need to do to pursue the program. I would say if you have concerns, this is a great time to contact your congressional representatives. Okay. That's the answer we got for that one. All right, Terry, what's next on our list?
Okay, we have, where is the best place to stay up to date with factual information regarding PSLF as things change rapidly? The info on student.gov is not always clear or user-friendly.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, right now, nothing is rapidly changing about PSLF itself. So there's not anywhere I would say that you could find, or sign up for updates in that regard. I think the most pressing sort of related element is the SAVE litigation. And for that, the SAVE webpage um, is updated. It's not the most up to date, but there's nothing official, right, that you can look at besides those web pages. Um, we all see stuff that happens in the news and we can kind of extrapolate from that. But that's all essentially speculation unless it's reported through official sources. So, um, you know, I would say continue checking the web pages. That's the best source that we have to go off of right now. And moving forward, unless we hear something different. Yeah.
So, you told me I could try, just so everybody knows, I'm fairly new in my role. Amber is my mentor, and as well as colleague in all of this. Um, Trying to look, there's, we just had a new upvote. If Congress actually dissolved PSLF, is there any talk of Washington State providing assistance to Washington public servants who have been pursuing PSLF? And so I work for the Office of Financial Management, and what I can tell you right now is the state budget issues have not included any conversation in particular about student loan forgiveness. And this is another one of those questions that we really just can't answer. It's so hard to know what could happen in the future with any of this stuff. So we'll all just have to keep our eyes open and watch that. And
And I'll
then,
add on to that. Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I just
oh
add a
yeah,
little bit?
sure.
So our office, the Office of the Student Loan Advocate, and I guess, we allude to the fact that Terry and I work for different agencies and have different focuses. Terry does the most work with state employers and assisting those folks with the certification requirements that they have under state law. My work with the Student Loan Advocate is more directly with borrowers. Uh, so I just wanted to throw that out there a little bit. But our Office of the Student Loan Advocate, we continue to advocate for borrowers and plan to, like, that's not changing. We're continuing to do the work. There is a broader PSLF coalition that is made up of representatives across a variety of nonprofit organizations, unions, et cetera, that are all fighting for PSLF. So I know it feels like you're alone when you're in the middle of just doing your public service and submitting your forms, but there is a wider national I guess support or advocacy for PSLF. So that's what I focus on right now personally is that these efforts are continuing. I think that there would be a lot of resistance to the idea of removing PSLF. But there are people that are this is the hill that they're going to die on, right? So there is advocacy going on constantly behind the scenes. So please know that.
Um, Here's one for you, Amber. For those of us on SAVE, are we expected to be able to buy back past months on the forbearance in order to get those months to count in the future?
Yes, essentially. I expected that word throws me off a little bit, but yes, as of right now, the only way to receive credit towards PSLF for the months in the SAVE forbearance would be to buy the months back when you reach that 120 months of qualifying employment. So Let's say you were an individual that was at 115 payments in June of 2024. And so the next 5 months were going to be your last 5 payments to reach 120. Well, at the point that you've reached those 5 months, right, then you know you've had 120 months of qualifying employment. In order to get credit for those past 5 months, you would have to submit the buyback request to try to buy back those months. I think that example maybe gives you the answer to that question.
Here's one that I think relates to the list of the list keeps shifting on me and I lost it. But it's a question about I was under the impression that my time employed by a public service entity would count during COVID, regardless of payments due to the payments being paused. Is that incorrect? And so I think this is a reference back to our sharing that administrative forbearance due to a local or national emergency would not count.
So there's a little bit of nuance to that question. So if you were already, before the COVID pause, if you were paying your monthly payment under an IDR plan, or just in general, you were making payments, and then COVID happened, payments were paused, and you didn't make payments during that time, but you were still employed by the public service entity, yes, that time period should count. You would need to make sure that your employment is certified. Remember, so if you submitted a form last before that time period, the government has no way in relation to student loans to know that you're still working for that same employer. So you have to submit a new form to get prior employment or employment for that period certified. So that's the first thing I would say. There are certain statuses that would prevent you from getting credits for those months. So if you were in school during those months, even if you were then employed full-time, if you were in school deferment, that would prevent you from getting credit from those months. Similarly, if you were in a grace period for some of those months, if you were in default before COVID and didn't take advantage of Fresh Start, months in default don't count towards your payment count. So I would say there's a lot of nuance to that situation. It really is just dependent. But I would say, if you haven't certified employment, start there. And if you think that time should count and you're not sure why it's not, reach out to our office and we'll see if we can help you figure that out.
Right. So I think this is a good one. If we received a second degree within the 10 years of PSLF, does the timeline reset and it's an additional 10 for PSLF after your most recent degree?
Great question. So essentially, when you are certifying your months of employment, right, in order for a month to count towards PSLF, requires that you made a payment under one of the qualifying payment plans and that you had qualifying employment. If you made payments on your undergrad loans, but then later went to grad school, unless you consolidate your loans, the payments that you made on those undergrad loans don't apply to the new loans that you took out. So if you left your loans separate, they would be on different timelines for PSLF because the new loans wouldn't have been in repayment before they entered repayment after you left school or finished school. Folks can choose to consolidate loans together. So some folks, maybe they had undergrad and then maybe they worked for a year and then maybe they did grad school. And so maybe they have a year of payments towards PSLF in that time for the undergrad loans, but they want some credit to count towards the grad loans. There is a process now. We mentioned this earlier. If you were to consolidate those loans together for a new consolidation loan, a weighted average of existing PSLF payment counts would be applied to that new loan. So in that particular scenario, they might only get 6 months of time towards PSLF on the new loan. So timeline does not reset necessarily. It's just they might be on separate timelines. So it doesn't, a new timeline on the second set of loans doesn't impact the timeline of the first loan, unless of course you then consolidate. So that is one of those. It really does depend on the situation, depends maybe on the loan amount, depends on how much time you're talking as far as your PSLF payment counts. Some folks might choose to not consolidate, get forgiveness maybe on some of their loans and then pay off the others, or maybe just have two different timelines towards PSLF. Others might choose to consolidate. It's a highly personal kind of decision.
Amber, there's a question that I think is probably best put to the student loan advocate through your Washington Student Complaint Portal, but I'll read it. It seems kind of complicated, but according to Mohila, forbearance starting 8/24 didn't count toward PSLF. Can borrowers pay for 8/24 until today based on the prior year's income, as would have been the case if there hadn't been a forbearance, since payment would be lower to a later increase in wages?
So that question kind of speaks. So in order to get credit for those months, you would have to go through the buyback process. On the buyback webpage, they have a breakdown of how payments for those periods are calculated. I would recommend taking a look there. I think that will provide the best guidance on what you would expect those like buyback payment amount to be for those months. I can't speak to whether it would be the lower amount or not, but follow that guidance there and see if that answers the question.
All right. Now I have a question. I think, well, first of all, I have two questions I think I can answer, but Amber will supplement my responses if they're not correct. So, can we meet with someone in your office to ask questions specific to our circumstances? So I just want to note that I have put a link to the student complaint portal in the chat, and please submit questions there, and the Student Loan Advocate's Office can get back to you directly. But again, it will take a little while to respond. There's another question that says, how does maternity leave through PFML, paid state leave, impact PSLF? So I can tell you that is that time would qualify for PSLF. And I've had that question through state employers and have looked it up in the CFRs as well as in our state statutes. And so, Amber, did I answer that one correctly? It's based on your status. When you take this approved leave, your status as an employee, if you were full-time while you were out on leave, this also includes if you take paid time off, regular paid time off, that all counts towards your qualifying credit for PSLF.
Yes, that's accurate.
All right.
And I do want to jump back to address so our office, the Office of the Student Loan Advocate, is myself as the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Advocate, and Jessica Manfredi, who is our Student Loan Advocate. Jess is out on family leave for the last several months and continuing. And so the office is just me right now. So throwing that out there, we don't have a huge team. It is usually myself and one other person going through and addressing complaints. And so when we say our time frame, is 6 to 8 weeks, it really is because there's just one or two of us depending on the time. And so, please do submit your complaints and questions where you can find information. We highly encourage folks to do so and do the research on their own. Depending on the question, we might send resources. We can't guarantee a meeting with us individually for every borrower. For example, there was about 330 folks on this call. If we scheduled a 30-minute meeting with all of those folks, it would be months of meetings with just those folks. So that's all to say, like, we will try to get through your questions as quickly as possible, but depending on your question, we may not be able to get to it in a time frame that you might need an answer. We also may not have an answer depending on what the question is, right? If it's again related to some of these kind of bigger unknowns. So I don't want to discourage folks from submitting questions or complaints, especially if it's a complaint about a servicer that you think might violate our Student Bill of Rights for the state. We can forward that along to our Department of Financial Institutions for investigation. But like, I just want to be real with folks. We care about every single one of you and about your concerns and the situations that you're dealing with. But please just, give us a little bit of grace where you can, if we're not able to get back to you. I know I'm still working through some of the submissions from November and December still. So just want to give folks some realistic expectation to put that out there. So yeah, I believe in being real and honest with folks. So we care. It's not, if you don't hear back from us for a while, please know that we will get back to you. It just may take some time.
So, I just want to say there are a lot of questions that really are based, they're a future state question. What if this happens? What if that happens? And we've spent some time saying until things actually change in terms of federal law and what that impact would be to Washington State, we just can't tell you that right now. So I, I'll just put that out there, and I think Amber's done a pretty good job of answering that. I am seeing some general questions, Amber, about changing the type of plan you're in. Like if I was income based or some kind of IDR and then I went to save, can I go back? Or if I'm now in an IDR, IBR or something, can I go back to save? So maybe you could just speak a little bit about the eligibility to change the type of loan you're on. And I'll just cover all of that by saying right now, it sounds like all of the loan servicers are in a bit of a backlog, with Mohila being the biggest backlog of all. So again, knowing that that's the case and you have these 60-day forbearance periods that may draw interest that don't count towards PSLF credit. Outside of that, what's the eligibility to switch between loans?
So between repayment plans, you mean? Just
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if you're in the save forbearance, you can submit an application to switch to one of the other ones. The biggest piece is like, do you meet the eligibility requirements? The income driven repayment plan page on the studentaid.gov website, again, it's going to be linked in the slide deck, does have kind of what the eligibility is for each of the plans. But you can switch out. It again is just going to take probably a bit of time for the processing to happen. If you're in one of the other plans, so if you're in, let's say IBR, maybe the payments aren't affordable and you're trying to maybe see if you're eligible for one of the other plans, technically you can still submit an application for the save plan. So you can still submit an IDR application that marks the save plan. Essentially, it gets paused. So what happens is you have this 60-day processing forbearance. If it's not processed, you get placed basically into that save forbearance that's 0% interest, but also doesn't count towards PSLF. So, I mean, yes, it's possible to do that. I guess that could be an option if you're struggling to make payments under your existing plan. But it'll take a while probably to get processed. They're prioritizing processing folks trying to move into IBR, payee, and ICR for processing. So does that kind of get at, Terry, what you were asking?
Yes. And so in general, there's some questions about like I've been in a qualifying status, like for example, cancer treatment, and didn't know that those would qualify for forbearance. How can I qualify that retroactively?
I'm not sure that you can. I would maybe need to investigate that a little bit further. Um, but you could call your servicer and ask that question. And that's probably the most direct way to maybe find an answer to that is call your servicer and explain the situation and ask if it's possible. Um, yeah.
So Amber, we just I don't know if this is too detailed, but it seems like it's worth answering. I've been on the IBR for over 5 years, and I recently called Mohila to change my repayment plan and was told that if I change it, I will not qualify for PSLF because they have transitioned to save. Now, therefore, I am paused. Has anyone else experienced this? I feel so stuck. I was 10 payments away from reaching 120.
So for that individual, I would recommend go ahead and filling out her forms. Because it sounds like Mohila might be providing some misinformation that maybe needs to get sent over to DFI. I've not heard of folks getting placed in sort of like a limbo like that. So I would want to look into that a little bit more. That's one of the things that's hard with a presentation like this with questions that are highly personal is we really, because there may be so many nuances to it, we might not be able to provide an answer.
Yeah, so that's an overarching ask of everyone. Again, the link to file a complaint or a question is in the chat. So please either click on that now to save it or watch for it when the slide deck is sent out so that you can pose your question. There is at least one user in the chat who's not seeing any history of payments in their studentaid.gov account. And how do I take care of this to make sure they're reflected? Should that also be an instance where people could submit a question to the complaint portal?
Yeah, if they're not seeing, so if they're in that situation, if they were someone that recently consolidated, submitting a new PSLF form might trigger the system to input that history. I've heard of that happening in at least one case before. So that would be kind of my first recommendation for that individual.
There's a question about going back and recouping credit for like past employment. And if you were making, you had a qualifying loan, making qualifying payments, but you just didn't submit a PSLF employment certification form, yes, you can do that retroactively.
And one of the things I do want to address, because I see a question about accruing interest. So I mentioned this, or I think Terry mentioned it earlier in the presentation. So if you were in that save forbearance that's supposed to be 0% interest, some of the servicers still show that they're accruing interest and then they later remove it. So they might be showing interest accrual for 1 month and then they might remove it at the end of the month and then they do that again the next month. Others, they're showing it accruing across a quarter and then they're zeroing it out. Other servicers are not showing any accrual at all, which you would think would be the greatest way to do it for folks, but that's not something the Department of Education can tell them what to do specifically and how to handle it. It's just at the end of the day that they need to follow the terms that there's not interest accrued. So you can call the servicer. I saw one individual who's called several times, been on hold for hours, which is unfortunately the standard or common right now. Keep an eye, I would say, kind of look back at your statements or at your account history to see, is there a point that maybe they zeroed it out? That might be a good way to tell, okay, have they been doing this accrual for a month or 2 or 3 and then zeroing it out. You can call again, you may or may not get through. But go ahead and submit a complaint to our office about that in particular. Again, that's something that we can forward over to Department of Financial Institutions to take a look at a little bit further.
So I'm seeing a question about a person with Grad Plus and unsubsidized loans. They all say this loan is ineligible for PSLF or TEPSLF. Why is that? I think that gets back to probably
It's probably a repayment plan issue. So if they're
yeah.
in the standard, not the standard, but if they're in one of the like graduated or extended repayment plans that, you pay off the balance across 20, 25 years, those plans are not eligible for PSLF. And so you might need to switch to a IDR plan or the standard 10-year plan for it to show them as kind of eligible. I do want to address real quick, if you have payments due and you're not able to make those payments, what we would encourage you to do, if you are already on an IDR plan and you can't switch, call your servicer to ask about options for deferment. So like an economic hardship deferment. There is, certain thresholds you might have to meet to qualify for that type of deferment. But we highly recommend that you explore those options rather than just not making a payment, because not making a payment leads to delinquency, which could eventually lead to default, which could eventually lead to collections and wage garnishment. So we don't want folks to get into that situation. So IDR plans are the first thing that we recommend folks look at. Sometimes, depending on your income, the graduated or extended plans might be more affordable. But just that you could switch to one of those, but it wouldn't count towards PSLF time. So, there might be trade-offs in that regard, but please do everything you can to avoid missing your payment altogether. So, all right, well, we're at 1:30. I know we did not get to nearly all of the questions. We answered what we can. Stay tuned, stay aware, keep doing what you're doing. As far as PSLF goes, keep submitting your forms. And just, until something changes, we have what we have right now. Okay. So, I don't think we'll be able to download or like send out to address all the questions, because probably the amount of time that it would take me to go through and type out responses for all the questions is time that I could be working through some of the existing complaints. If you feel like you do have a really specific situation, go ahead and submit a complaint through our office. We'll get to it as soon as we can, and we'll work with you. So, Terry, any kind of last words that you want to share?
Thank you all for your time. And yeah, I echo what you just said, Amber. If there's something very specific, like it's been several months since I've made a request to change my repayment plan and you haven't heard back, those are the kinds of things that I would also encourage people to submit a question, at least through the complaint portal. Make a phone call to your loan servicer. And yes, I know the wait may be very long. Amber, one quick thing. You don't have to go through MOHELA to qualify for PSLF anymore, correct?
You do not know. PSLF is all managed by federal student aid at this point. So employer certifications, that's all through federal student aid. You should not be sending PSLF forms to your servicer anymore.
And it's a total buyer beware issue. So please investigate. the Student Loan Advocates website. I've put that on here. It also includes links to FSA's website that talks about the various types of loans that are available. And when you have questions, again, there is the student complaint portal that you can submit them through. Thanks, everyone.